If I could have, can everybody hear me? Okay. If I can ask everybody to have a seat and kind of settle down a smidge, we're going to get ready to start with planning and administration. I'd like to remind everyone that we audio and video record our meetings. And for the board, I ask that you please remember to push your microphone button when you have something to say on the record, and then push it when you're finished so that anybody else who has something to say and has a question or comment, they have an opportunity to do so. So with that, I will turn it over to Director Fuentes, the chair of our Planning and Administration Committee.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Secretary, please call roll.
Director Durante. Director Fraga.
Aye.
Director Higgins.
Here.
Director Hobson.
Here.
Director Pang. Director Ross. Director Fuentes.
Here.
We have a quorum of 6 present with 1 absent. If the record would also show that Directors Anderson, Colson, DeWitt, Cotel, Lewis, McGallis, Troiani, and Chairman Dillard are all also present.
Thank you. Next is approval of the minutes from the meeting held on October 19th, 2017. Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, can I have a motion to accept? Director Ross, second. Director Fraga. Secretary, please call roll.
Director Durante. Director Fraga. Director Higgins. Director Hobson.
Here.
Director Ross. Director Fuentes.
Aye.
6 ayes and 1 absent.
Thank you. Next is an ordinance amending the RTA's procurement rules and regulations. Nadine.
Good morning, Chairman Fuentes. Good morning, Chairman Dillard and directors. The ordinance before you requests that the board adopt the revised procurement rules and regulations as we have submitted them for your review. The genesis of the request is a legislative change made by the Illinois General Assembly a few months ago. Section 4.06 of the RTA Act governs the statutory requirements for procuring goods and services for the RTA, Metra, and PACE. This section of the Act now requires that procurements over the Federal Transit Administration's small purchase threshold be made after public notice and with public bidding. The purpose of the proposed amendment to the rules is twofold. First, to bring our rules in line with the change in the law, and second, to leverage the legislative change to increase operational efficiency. The FTA small purchase threshold is currently at $150,000. So the most significant changes to the proposed rules are 2. 1, the increase in public bidding threshold from $40,000 to $150,000, and 2, the correlated increase in the executive director's authority to execute contracts from $100,000 to $150,000. Other more minor changes are outlined in the memo. First, let's discuss what is meant by public notice and public bidding. In essence, public notice refers to the practice of posting an ad describing the agency's intent to purchase in a newspaper of general circulation. Public bidding refers to the practice of encouraging competition by soliciting proposals, bids, and quotes from a number of vendors to provide goods and services. So let's talk a bit about competition, transparency, and DMWBE participation and how those are potentially impacted. As we were reviewing the rules in light of the legislative change, we obviously wanted to increase operational efficiency while continuing to encourage these 3 pillars of public purchasing. What do I mean by operational efficiency? In essence, I mean reducing or eliminating the performance of steps that add little value to the process while costing the agency in terms of administrative staff time and delaying the provision of services to the public. Anyone who has been in public service knows all too well that the public procurement process can involve requirements that do not necessarily protect the public trust, competition, or transparency. We're always looking for ways to first maintain those 3 ideals while not wasting the public's time and money. So first, competition. The amended rules provide that we will continue to issue public solicitations, such as RFPs, IFBs, RFQs, etc., for all procurements valued above $40,000. All of those are posted on our website in addition to being sent directly to potential vendors. Now that's a boost to transparency in addition to competition. Only with micro purchases, which are under $3,000, is competition not required, and even then the rules explicitly recommend it. The level of competition should therefore not be impacted by the proposed amendments. We will no longer be posting those solicitations in a newspaper of general circulation, and that is the only change to the public notice portion of our prior process. Operationally, that will save several days in completing a procurement because of the lag between sending the notice to the newspaper and actually having it appear in print form. And to be frank, that method of solicitation is outdated and does virtually nothing to increase competition or transparency. Advertising our procurement portal, encouraging vendors through direct outreach to register to receive our solicitations, outreach events such as the annual Transportation Symposium, direct notification via email to vendors. We've identified through internet searches, work with other municipalities, and outreach to industry orgs are all far more effective methods of increasing competition. At any rate, we anticipate no negative impact to competition based on these proposed rule modifications, and the new rules continue to require and employ every public procurement best practice. Next, let's discuss transparency to both the board and the public. First, let's talk about SHITAP. Other recent changes in the law have increased the transparency of our procurements. You might recall that Section 5.06 of the RTA Act now requires, among other things, that the RTA maintain a web-based transparency portal that, among other things, posts all contracts exceeding $10,000 and every expenditure. That single portal is updated by all 4 agencies on a monthly basis. Our audit department reviews the portal periodically to ensure that we're all up to date in our postings. And for those who want even more information than what is posted on the websites, FOIA remains a tool available to the public. And believe me, the public makes good use of it. Additionally, recent changes to our processes will also increase transparency. We adopted a new system, a new web-based system called eBid. We caught up with the rest of the universe and created an improved online vendor registration portal, making it easier for vendors to obtain solicitations when we let them. Third, Janice Meeks, our new manager of procurement and contracted, has instituted a roundtable of procurement professionals from a number of local agencies, including the service boards, to explore opportunities for joint purchasing, share best practices, exchange information, etc. The roundtable is still in its infancy, but among the 4 transit agencies, we've agreed to link to each other's solicitations on our websites. That should increase both transparency and competition for the RTA. The buying plan. In 2017, we formally presented our buying plan to the board for the upcoming year. That was the first time we'd implemented that practice. Additionally, that buying plan was shared at outreach events attended or conducted by RTA staff throughout the year. This is an example of sharing procurement information with the public in advance of the solicitations. We plan to publicly present the plan again to the board in January. Okay, so now let's get to the numbers. In reviewing the rules, we weighed the pros and cons of changing the executive director's authorization level from $100,000 to $150,000. The obvious question is how many contracts would not be reaching the board in advance of execution, which are currently being presented to the board under the current rules. In each of the last 2 years, only 2 contracts have been entered into by the RTA in that range. In all cases, those specific contracts would continue to be brought to the board even under the new rules because of the types of services involved. Lobbying contracts, for instance, all come to the board under our current rules regardless of the dollar value of the contract. The same goes for intergovernmental agreements that are above $100,000 and task order contracts. We'd still like to keep open the option of having Leanne execute for the very rare occasion that a contract in that narrow window comes up. Weighing the small number of contracts against all of the other ways that the interested public is notified, it seemed like an almost non-existent loss in transparency, while potentially eliminating 2 months of delay in executing a contract and beginning the delivery of services. It also seems logical to align the contracts above the bidding threshold to the executive director's signature authority. Next, let's discuss DMWBE participation. We expect no negative impact to minority and small business participation as a result of these changes to the rules. As you can see, our rules continue to explicitly provide that we will review all contracts valued above $40,000 for DBE participation. Our DBE goals submitted to the FTA are based on that practice, and we wouldn't do anything that might decrease participation. Additionally, as part of our updated DBE program and consistent with one of the recommendations in our recently completed availability study, we are implementing our small business set-aside program. The first contract set aside exclusively for certified small businesses was let. It was either this week or last week. That is a race-neutral way to increase participation in our program. That basically covers the basis for our request. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Director Clausen?
I got to confess, I'm a little troubled by the part of this proposal that eliminates all board review for contracts between $100,000 and $150,000. And coupled with the fact that there'd be no public bidding for contracts up to $150,000, I think we are giving up some oversight and some public notice, because when a matter comes before this board, it gets on the agenda and it's discussed and it's fully aired. And that wouldn't happen under these regulations. I don't know why we would give up our responsibility here without some better reason than I've heard. Since there are only 2 contracts that this would have affected, it seems to me that cuts against your argument that it would be more efficient or more convenient. It's only 2 contracts. It's not that burdensome. So I don't know why we would do this, frankly. I mean, where I come from, $100,000 is a lot of money, and I think the board should not abdicate its responsibility just in the interest of convenience, which should not override our oversight and the transparency that it should be required.
Director Colson, I just want to clarify one point. Our public notice will not be changing other than posting in the newspapers. Every other aspect of our process will remain the same at $40,000 and above. We'll still be soliciting using RFPs, IFBs, RFQs, the exact same process that we followed in the past. We just won't have the requirement of posting in the newspaper, which, to be frank, was a useless practice to begin with. Now, with regard to your other, concern and the decrease in transparency, I completely understand your concern. However, that 2-month delay is fairly significant operationally for both the RTA and for the vendors who have negotiated a contract in good faith. Sometimes that process can take 6, 8 months, sometimes even longer, depending upon the complexity of the procurement. Saving those 2 months on contracts would really increase operational efficiency, and it just makes sense that the legislature has decided that contracts below that threshold don't necessarily require public bidding. It just made sense to us to align the public bidding threshold along with the executive director's signatory authority. We don't think it would impact that many contracts, so it really doesn't necessarily help the staff a lot, but we'd like to keep the option open for those few contracts that might be impacted. But I do understand your concern.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm more concerned about our giving up our responsibility to review contracts between 100,000 and 150. I would like to retain that oversight responsibility.
Thank you. Director Hobson?
Yeah, just because the state has done this, they're certainly not the poster child for fiscal responsibility. I tend to agree with Mr. Colson regarding the $100,000 to $150,000 threshold. Now, this ordinance has other things in it besides the change in the dollar levels, right? In terms of the web portal. So some of those things were
Well, those things aren't in this ordinance.
They are not in. So really, the ordinance is exclusively regarding the changes in the dollar levels, the thresholds.
There were some other minor there were some technical corrections, there were some typos that were corrected from the prior rules, there were some definitions that were added to clarify the prior rules, but substantively it's those 2 major changes, yes.
And you talk about the 2 months additional with this particular process. Perhaps it's not the threshold that's the problem, but more the process that's the problem. Is there any way of looking at the process in terms of expediting that? We meet monthly, so I don't see why having our approval would add a 2-month delay.
Well, I could go through the entire timeline, but it's fairly complicated. For instance, if we negotiate a contract and it isn't fully negotiated in time to send the documents to the board and for public notice and for all of that, that means we have to wait until the following month when there's another meeting. So that's 6 weeks. We don't sign the contract the day before the board and put it on the agenda the day before. That's done weeks in advance. So if we don't make that month, you're talking about at least 6 weeks. And if for whatever reason there isn't any other important matter before the board in that following month and the meeting isn't held, now you're talking about 2.5 months. It's significant for the folks who have to run this very small agency. And it's significant to the business community as well that they have to wait that long to start to deliver services, especially for smaller businesses.
If we perhaps amended this to revise the 150 to 100 and leave it at 100, would that add some operational efficiencies for the thresholds below that, yet still maintain the $100,000 threshold that Director Colson and I are both concerned about? Because in McHenry County, $100,000 is a lot of money. It might be lunch money here in Chicago, but in McHenry County, it's a lot
It's
of
not
money.
lunch money anywhere. It's a lot of money to us, too.
So what is your thought if we amended that to just have the upper threshold reduced from 150 to 100?
I'm not sure I understand it. We're already at 100 currently.
Well, right, but the rest of the ordinance would then go through as is.
Oh, so you just want to make that one change?
That,
So, well,
if that one change, I mean, does that essentially, spoil the whole pie, so to speak?
I mean, it doesn't create any new efficiencies for staff or for the vendors. So that's my position on that. But I understand if someone wants to make a motion to make that amendment.
Okay, thank you.
Director Lewis?
Nadine, I know you explained the impact on. Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Chris always helps me out. I'd like to get a little more clarification on the DVE MB portion. I know that the threshold is being increased, and you're assuring us that they've got safeguards, but particularly on professional service fees, professional service organizations for MBE, DVEs, could you give a little more background on how the assurances are there that those entities won't be negatively impacted by this?
The current process is that we review every contract above $40,000 for potential DBE or MWBE participation. As you know, the MWBE portion is actually new to our program, given that we just got our availability study completed earlier this year. That practice continues, and it's not just a practice, it's actually required by the new rules. So we will continue to review every single contract that we believe will be valued above $40,000 for potential DBE participation. We can't do anything that's going to affect our federal funding. Obviously, that's part of our federally submitted and approved DBE program, so that process will absolutely not change. If anything, we've implemented some new practices that we're hoping will increase DBE and MWBE participation in the coming year.
And professional service firms, do you think will be included in that element?
The vast bulk of what we purchase at the RTA, unlike the service boards, is professional services. And so that's why we kind of have like a large grouping of contracts under the $150,000 threshold and very few above it.
Director Duraney?
I'm questioning the fallout of the perception of what Director Clausen brought up as opposed to the perception that we delay this at least for another month. And I think the fallout on the perception of no bid outweighs.
I just want to, again, clarify, just to be 100% clear on this point, the threshold for bidding is not changing. The threshold for publishing in a newspaper of general circulation is changing. We're still going to be bidding every contract above $40,000. We're still going to be using RFPs, RFQs, IFBs. That entire public solicitation process will continue. So that part is not changing.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Hearing none, do I have a motion? Accept as presented. So moved by Director Fraga. Second? Second by Director Ross. Secretary, please call roll.
Director Durante?
No.
Director Fraga? Aye. Director Higgins?
No.
Director Hobson?
No.
Director Pang?
Yes.
Director Ross? Yes. Director Fuentes?
Yes.
4 ayes and 3 nays.
Thank you. If there's no more further business to come before the committee, can I have a motion to adjourn? Second? All those in favor?
Who moved?
Director Duraney, I'm sorry.
Have we
And the
moved
second?
to close the meeting yet?
Oh.
May I
sorry.
ask the board to essentially consider entertaining Director Hobson's suggestion that we amend the motion perhaps to keep all the other technical and minor cleanups to the ordinance and just reduce, take out the 150, the 100 to 150 piece of this, and just keep it at the 100, so it'll still come back. Everything will come back to the board, but we get to just do the other minor cleanup elements of the ordinance as opposed to having to come back again another
Mr.
time.
Chairman, I would like to make that motion.
So Nadine, could you word that for us?
It sounds like the only change we wouldn't be accepting would be the increase in the executive director's signatory threshold for not having to bring contracts to the board.
Correct.
I can make that correction.
Okay. So, to make that motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Second, Director Higgins. Secretary, please call roll.
Director Durante.
Aye.
Director Frega. Director Higgins.
Aye.
Director Hobson.
Yes.
Director Pang.
Yes.
Director Ross. Yes. Director Fuentes.
Aye.
7 ayes.
Thank you. Now, if there's no more further business to go in front of the public session of the Planning and Administrative Committee, can I have a motion to adjourn? So moved by Director Durante, seconded by Director Higgins. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
We stand adjourned.
Finance Committee meeting to order. Would the Secretary please call the roll?
Director Anderson.
Here.
Director Colson. Here. Director DeWitt.
Here.
Director Cotel. Here. Director Lewis.
Here.
Director Melvin.
Here.
Director Troiani.
Here.
Director McGallis.
Here.
We have a quorum of 8 present and no absent. If the record would also show that Directors Durante, Frega, Fuentes, Higgins, Hobson, Pang, Ross, and Chairman Dillard are all also present.
Thank you. Item number 2.